Good day, everyone. Right now, we're going to tackle about complementations in chapter 31. Complements. When we say complements, it is the term used for a word or words that are needed to complete the meaning of an expression. Complements, which are constituents needed to complete the meaning of a verb or an adjective, are often distinguished from adjuncts, which are perceived not to be central to the prepositional meaning of the sentence and which are never required to occur with a verb or adjective. In the examples below, John believed that Jill was coming. That Jill was coming was a complement, while in the second example, John almost believed that Jill was coming. That almost there is an adjunct. Most phrases and clauses will include a complement of some kind. If you can't remove it from your sentence, then it's likely to be a complement. This is how complements differ from adjuncts. Adjuncts are optional as they are usually just descriptive. Complements are not optional. They are essential to ensure understanding. In this chapter, we discuss clausal complements that include at least a verbal element with an assumed subject and often an expressed subject as well. These complements fall naturally into 5 types. First is the full clausal that complements with tense verbs. Second is tenseless subjunctive complements. Third is infinitives. Fourth is gerunds. And fifth is the noun participle constructions. These 5 types of clausal complements tend to be strictly associated with the occurrence of certain verbs. So let's proceed for the first complement, which is the ordinary that complements. Ordinary that complements. Tense that clauses are one of the most frequent types of clausal complement. For example, scientists claim that the globe is getting warmer. We long expected that nothing worthwhile would come from our effort. People generally know that bears don't make good bets. In each case, we have a complete sentence. Notice that the material inside the brackets looks exactly like an ordinary clause except that it is prefaced by that. In each bracketed clause, there is a subject and a verb, and there may be various types of additional information, such as one would find in an ordinary sentence. The first auxiliary verb may appear in the present or past tense, or it may be a modal auxiliary. What is different is that these bracketed clauses cannot stand by themselves as acceptable sequence as long as they begin with that. As what we discussed in chapter 25, such clauses are called dependent clauses because they depend on or require the presence of another clause to which they are attached in some way. Moreover, in each full sentence in the previous slide, the dependent that clause seems to stand in a position in which an NP might ordinarily stand. For example, scientists often claim great discoveries. We expected nothing else, and everyone knows the answer. This suggests that we should regard these dependent clauses as noun-like in nature. So, the great discoveries, nothing else, and the answer can fall under the category of as direct objects. Additional evidence to support the belief that the embedded clauses are noun-like is the fact that they behave like the corresponding noun phrases. In all the cases above, the bracketed material can appear in a passive sentence as a subject that is in another position where noun phrases occur. For example, great discoveries are often claimed by scientists. That the earth is getting warmer is claimed by scientists. In these cases, you can clearly see that the bracketed material are examples of the dependent that clauses that can stand in the noun phrase position because it can appear in a passive sentence. A third piece of evidence for the noun phrase's status of these clauses is that each that clauses answers the typical noun-like question what, just as does each case of simple noun phrase object. For example, what do scientists often claim? Great discoveries. What do scientists often claim? That the earth is getting warmer. Another way to incorporate this new possibility into our grammar is to rewrite the phrase structure rule for the expansion of noun phrases. Noun phrase is consist of determiner, adjective phrase, noun, or it can be plural, and prepositional phrase. We will now say that it is possible for an S to function as a noun phrase. It should be clear that this use of that is not as the same as the word that in relative clauses, because the that in relative clauses can replace a full noun phrase. For example, this is the shop that I told you about. The that there is equivalent to shop. Well, for the second sentence, scientists claim that the globe is getting warmer. The that there is used to complete the meaning of the sentence. Do you understand it? Another one is the that in complement clauses is not identical to demonstrative determiner that, because the demonstrative determiner that is used to receive emphatic or contrastive stress. For example, that's the type of bird I was telling you about. The word that there is used to emphasize that that is really the type of bird I was telling you about. For the second one, we should pay attention to the sign, not that one. The that there is used to receive a contrastive stress. And for the last one, scientists claim that the globe is getting warmer. The that there is used again to complete the meaning of the sentence. In the case of complement clauses, it seems we have a third type of that, one we shall call a complementizer, a signal of a complement clause. Complementizer refers to the part of speech which includes the words which introduce complement clauses. Examples are that, if, and whether. This complementizer is neither of the noun or pronoun category nor of any other grammatical category we have introduced so far in the book. We will abbreviate it in the tree as comp. We will place it under S in a position adjacent to and to the left of sentence bar. We also have to expand the options for writing the rule for S to include an optional complementizer as follows. Sentence is consist of complementizer and sentence modifier and again sentence bar. We must leave the complementizer optional both because simple, single clause sentences do not require them and because it is possible for complement clauses like those above to appear without that. For example, scientists often claim the globe is getting warmer. People generally know bears don't make good pets. Later in this chapter, we will discuss some reasons why that might be included or omitted in such clauses. There are many verbs that permit or require tense that complements as objects. Besides believe, claim, and expect, and know, among the more common are assume, discover, explain, find out, imagine, learn, perceived, point, promise, prove, see, show, think, and understand. For example, the lecturer explained that the source of the error was human. The dealer promised that my car would be fixed for free. New evidence shows that broccoli sprouts are more healthful than broccoli. The second type of complements is the subjunctive complements. An additional type of that clause is superficially similar to the type above, but different in that the form of the verb in the embedded clause or in the bracketed material does not vary regardless of whether the subject is first, second, or third person, or singular or plural, and regardless of time reference. Such clauses are called subjunctive complements. In the cases below, they insist that all the students sign up for counselors. They insist that this student sign up for a counselor. As you can see, the word sign up there is still the same regardless of their subjects, which are the students in a plural form and student in a singular form. Do you understand it? Another one is the customer is demanding that the store return his money. The customer demanded that the store return his money. As you can see, the italicized word there, which is return, is still the same regardless of the time reference in the main verb, which are the is demanding in the present tense and demanded in a past tense. In the sentences, they insist that this student signs up for a counselor and the customer demanded that the store return his money are ungrammatical because the verbs in the embedded clauses, which are the signs up and returned, should not have any tense at all. The fact that the embedded verb is never inflected or altered in any other way suggests that in forming a subjunctive, one uses only the base form of the verb. The resulting clauses are then without any sort of tense at all. Further evidence for this claim is that where the verb in the embedded clause is the copula be or the auxiliary be, only the base form is employed after insist and demand. For example, we insist that he be the one to make the call. The customer demanded that his money be returned. So instead of using any passive, progressive, or phrasal modal, we should use the base form of the verb. Gets. In subjunctive clauses, a negation element is always placed directly before the main verb rather than after an auxiliary verb. Thus, no addition of the do operator is possible. For example, we insist that he not make the telephone call instead of we insist that he do or does not make the telephone call. Without present or past tense in the clause, it should be clear that our expansion rule for auxiliary will have to allow for the possibility of a tenseless auxiliary node. Fortunately, we already have such a possibility in the imperative option for imperative sentences, which also lack tenses. The tree for a subjunctive sentence would then look like this. According to the PS rules, modal auxiliaries will not appear in subjunctive clauses. In general, this holds true in native speaker use, although many people do accept should or had to rather than imperative mood after the word insist, perhaps in an attempt to achieve a softening effect. For example, we insisted that he should or had to take the test again. The customer demanded that the store must or had to return his money. Besides, occurring after insist and demand, the subjunctive appears in embedded clause verbs after such main clause verbs of urging and advice, such as ask, prefer, propose, recommend, request, require, and suggest. For example, we ask or request that you please keep a little quieter. The members prefer that the constitution not be changed this year. The city proposed that the land be returned to the farmers. And we recommend that you order the fish. Do you understand the subjunctive complements? So now, let's proceed to the third type of complement, which is the infinitive complements. Infinitives, or so called because they are not finite or tensed, are an additional and far more common type of tenseless clause than subjunctives. There are 5 subtypes of infinitive complements. First is the believe type, second is the advise type, third is the attempt type, fourth is the want type, and fifth is the let type. So the first type is the believe type infinitives. It follows main clause verbs like believe and imagine. The bracketed parts of the sentences below seem to show no evidence of tense, regardless of their main verbs, whether it is in a present habitual time or in past tense or it indicates future time. Nothing inside the brackets will change. Like other clauses that we have considered, they seem to possess both subjects and verbs. And there does seem to be a marker, the auxiliary to, which stands roughly in the position in which auxiliary elements usually occur. This new expansion suggests that we cannot have infinitive to co-occurring with a modal verb, just like in the first sentence wherein the infinitive to is with a modal verb can. But that we can have perfect, progressive, and perfect progressive infinitives. In fact, these claims are validated by data such as the following. The students believe their professor to be able to do good research. The to be able there is an example of perfect infinitive. Another one is the students believe their professor to be correcting their homework. The to be correcting there is an example of a progressive infinitive. And the last one is the students believe their professor to have been lecturing too much lately. The to have been lecturing there is an example of perfect progressive infinitive. The next question to answer is what position these infinitives occupy in the structure of the whole sentence. Are they direct object noun phrases as we argued for that clauses? The answer seems doubtful if we use a notional test that says that a direct object answers the question what about a main verb. For example, what did the students believe? Their professor to be amazing. What did the citizens imagine? The politician to have led an honest life. Moreover, if these infinitival clauses are noun phrases, we might expect them to appear in another noun phrase positions, such as subject position, yet they cannot appear as subjects of passive verbs in the way that complement clauses can. Just like in the examples in the screen. These facts then suggest that we add an S option to the phrase structure expansion for verb phrase to include infinitives. The optional noun phrase before the S will be explained shortly. This subject has some of the characteristics of a direct object within the main clause verb phrase. If we make the subject of the infinitive a pronoun, it will be of the object type, not the subject type, perhaps because of the preceding main verb, just like in the sentences below. For example, the second and the fourth sentences are ungrammatical. At the same time, we cannot really view the pronouns above or the noun phrases for which they substitute as true direct objects of the verbs believe and imagine, in spite of the fact that the pronouns occur in the objective case. We cannot ask the question, whom do the students believe? And get as our answer, her to be amazing. Nor can we ask the question, who do the citizens imagine? And receive the answer, him to have led an honest life. In fact, it hardly matters whether the infinitive in the second example appears in the active or the passive voice, for the meaning comes out approximately the same in either case, though the sentence becomes stylistically awkward. For example, the citizens imagine honest lives to have been led by their politicians. The fact that verbs like believe take complements that may have object pronoun subjects has made analysis of this type of infinitive difficult for linguists. But we will assume the amended PS rule as it stands. The related tree structure is as follows. Some other mental cognition verbs of this type include assume, find, know, perceive, prove, show, think, and understand. For example, the players assumed their opponents to have practiced more. They found the box to contain more money than they had expected. The geologists knew the hills to contain gold deposits. We perceived them to be uninterested in our proposal. The second type of infinitive complement is the advice type infinitive. Consider the following sentences. We advised the children to play baseball outside. The police officer ordered my friend to move his car. Let us assume, as before, that the infinitives here have no tense and that the to is to be analyzed as an element under auxiliary. In these cases, we get better results when we ask who type questions. For example, whom did we advise? The children. Whom did the police officer order? My friend. In these cases, it does seem to matter whether the infinitive is presented in the active or passive. The sentences below, to the degree that they are acceptable, show no synonymy with those above. We advise baseball to be played outside by the children. The police officer ordered my friend's car to be moved by him. In these examples, we really say that we cannot advise or order an inanimate object to do anything. As in the case of the first type of infinitive, we can also substitute an object pronoun by making use of the optional noun phrase that appears before subject in the revised verb phrase rule. For example, we advise them to play baseball outside. The police officer ordered him to move his car. We will say that there is an empty subject position whose identity is controlled or determined, in this case by the object of the main clause, and is identical to that object. We will call this empty element pro. It is not a lexical pronoun and does not show up on the surface. It merely signals that some noun phrase in the main clause functions semantically as the subject of the complement clause. The tree for the sentence "we advise the children to play baseball outside" is like this. We will then have to allow this pro element or an empty subject position whose identity is controlled or determined as an option for the expansion of noun phrase in our phrase structure rules. So, noun phrase consists of determiner, adjective phrase, noun that can be maybe plural, and prepositional phrase. Other verbs that fit this infinitive pattern are manipulative verbs like allow, cause, force, help, permit, persuade, and urge. For example, our parents allowed us to stay up late. The wind caused the canopy to fall down. Bad luck forced us to leave Las Vegas early. I helped my sister to find the answer. Note that the to auxiliary is optional after the verb help. The third type of infinitive complement is the attempt type infinitives. It involves a type of control, and in this case, the control comes from its subject. Two main clause verbs that require this infinitive type are attempt and tend. For example, the driver attempted to avoid the ice on the road. Bears tend to eat voraciously in the spring. In the case of the first sentence, the driver is the agent who is both attempting and hopefully avoiding. It is not possible that the agents who avoid or eat in these sentences could be anyone other than the main clause subjects. For example, the following make no sense at all. The driver attempted her to avoid the ice on the road. Bears tend chipmunks to eat voraciously in the spring. In this case, there is clearly no object at all, because they cannot be construed as direct objects. Following the pattern of the object control infinitive type, we could say that in these cases, the main clause subject controls the identity of the missing infinitival subject, which we will again call pro. The class also includes the verbs begin, continue, decide, fail, forget, manage, offer, proceed, promise, refuse, regret, remember, start, try, and vow. Some example sentences are in the following. They are nearly all intransitive verbs when they appear with infinitives following them. However, the verb promise is an exemption for many speakers. So the fourth type of infinitive complement is the one-type infinitives or the for-to infinitives. Consider the following sentences. A. I want to refinish the furniture. B. I want for him to refinish the furniture. For number 2, she intends to clean the house. She intends for him to clean the house. The object is overtly expressed, and some of the subjects of the infinitives may be introduced with for. In the A sentences in each pair, it is I and she who are doing the refinishing and cleaning. In these cases, we might assign the same tree structure as we did with the subject control verbs above, like attempt. The B sentences, which optionally introduce their infinitives with for, are clearly somehow different. We do not seem to have a tree type that this will fit. Let us apply the same tests that we did earlier. We can attempt to ask the usual who or what question that is normally associated with noun phrase objects. For example, what do you want? Him to refinish the furniture. The second one is for him to refinish the furniture. What does she intend? Him to clean the house. And the second one is for him to clean the house. Native speakers tend to find the for infinitive somewhat acceptable here, suggesting that at least that for infinitive may be seen as a noun phrase object of the main clause verb. At the same time, if we ask the who question, we come up with unfavorable results, suggesting that the pronoun him is not by itself the direct object of the verbs want and intend. If the infinitives appear in the passive voice, the sentences are equally grammatical and convey the same general idea, just like what the examples above. This suggests that these verbs are much like believe when they occur without subject control. Since the word for appears in much the same position as the complementizer that in tense clauses, we will treat it as such following the tradition established in generative grammar. The relevant tree structure is then as follows. With some verbs such as want, expect, and hope, some native speakers find the for phrase either overly colloquial, dialectal, or both, and simply use other means to express the same meaning. The factors that bear on this choice merit further research. Other future-oriented and effective verbs in this class which more readily occur with for include arrange, desire, expect, hate, hope, intend, like, love, plan, and prefer. For example, the travel agent arranged for us to take another trip. I would hate for you to be stranded in the cabin this winter. This subject of the infinitive will, of course, vary depending on the presence or absence of the for complementizer. When the for is present, the following noun phrases represents the subject of the infinitive. For example, in the sentence above, the travel agent arranged for us to take another trip. So the for us to take another trip is called the subject of the infinitive. So when there is no for phrase, the subject of the main clause represents the subject of the infinitive, which is represented as the pro in the tree. For example, the travel agent arranged us to take another trip. So the travel agent there represents the subject of the infinitive since there is no for phrase in the sentence. The last type of the infinitive complement is the let type or the bare stem infinitive. The main clause verbs with which it occurs are quite limited. This type is often called the bare stem infinitive, where the usual to is either optionally or obligatorily absent. For example, the teacher let the students go home early. We saw our friend leave the station. If we also apply the usual test to determine whether bare stem infinitives are objects of the main clause verb, we get unacceptable results. And again, if we apply the test to see if the noun phrases, the students, and our friend are direct objects of the main clause verb, we again get odd results. Other verbs in the class include feel, have, hear, help, make, observe, and watch. For example, we felt the door close behind us. The teacher had us repeat the exercise. And lastly, they heard the bell ring twice. As with infinitives that follow instances of verbs of that, let, or see class, we cannot say that bare stem infinitives are noun phrase objects. We will assume that they are simply clausal complements to the main clause verb. Since they include no express to, the auxiliary position will show the tenseless as it does in the case of the subjunctive complements. The tree structure for such sentences will be like the following. The fourth type of complements is the gerund complements. While that clauses and infinitives cover a large range of verbal complements in English, there is an additional type of complement, sometimes called the ing complement or gerund, which must also be discussed. Consider then an additional pair of sentences. Fred disliked making phone calls to John. Mary preferred doing other things with her time. The bracketed parts of the two sentences have some of the earned marks of other clauses we have been, specifically subject control infinitives, like those that follow the verb attempt. We seem to have a verb-object order of elements, with the logical subject of the bracketed material being the same as the subject of the whole sentence. For example, Fred making phone calls to John. 2. Fred made phone calls to John. The second one is Mary doing other things with her time. Into Mary did other things with her time. Also, we seem to have an auxiliary element in the inflection ing, though it is not the ing of the progressive, it is an affix that attaches itself to a verb stem. It is possible in fact to have both perfect and progressive forms in sequences like those above. For example, having made phone calls to John, and having been making phone calls to John. If we change the tense of dislike and prefer in the sentences above, the complement does not change at all. For example, Fred will dislike making phone calls to John. Mary prefers doing other things with her time. However, the verbal elements in the sequences making and doing seem to have the characteristics of nouns. With the addition of ing, verbs can regularly be made into nouns that can serve as subjects and objects of sentences. For example, what is most enjoyable for you? Hiking is most enjoyable for me. What do you enjoy? I enjoy swimming. The whatness of these verbal nouns called gerunds extends to gerund clauses as well. For example, what did Fred dislike? Making phone calls to John. What did Mary prefer? Doing other things with her time. We conclude that these gerund clauses are noun phrase objects, which happen also to have the status of clausal s. The relevant tree structure is in the next slide. It is possible to have a gerund phrase that has something that looks like an express subject, which is the logical pro has been replaced in the subject position. For example, Fred disliked Susan's making phone calls to John. Mary prefers his doing other things with his time. The Susans and his there have been replaced by a pro in the subject position. In each pair, we have what looks like an NP plus possessive morpheme or a possessive determiner, which is the apostrophe s and the his before the gerund noun. Thus, the tree representation in a previous slide must be amended to accommodate such cases by replacing the pro in the subject position with Susan or he and positing a possessive apostrophe s morpheme as a third type of complementizer. As you can see, the pro in the previous tree structure in the previous slide had been replaced by a complementizer apostrophe s under the sentence in the noun phrase in verb phrase category. You may see the other verbs that take gerund complements in the screen. Some occur only with pronoun phrase subjects, example, the begin and continue. Some require noun phrase subjects preceded by apostrophe s complementizers that may be different from the subject of the whole sentence. For example, appreciate and see. And some may occur either way. An example for this is enjoy and remember. Just as the that complementizer was optional in informal speech, so is the apostrophe s complementizer that accompanies subjects of gerunds for some speakers. Example, Fred dislikes Susan making phone calls to John. The last part of the complements is the subject participle complement. Subject participle complement is superficially similar to the possessive gerund complement, but the subject participle complement has a noun phrase or object pronoun in the place of the possessive form. This may be statistically more frequent than the possessive gerund, while some of the following sentences, which is the first three, can be viewed as colloquial simplifications of the possessive gerund construction, because they don't use apostrophe s complementizer and a possessive determiner. For example, for that is the his in the previous sentences. Unlike in the last three sentences, they cannot be viewed as colloquial simplifications of the possessive gerund construction. Once again, we have what looks like the general structure of a clause without a tense. In this case, it seems we have a stable element to place in subject position, and it is plausible to say that the entire bracketed clause functions as a unit as a noun subject, much as three relative clauses were viewed in chapter 29, to function as nouns in subject and object positions. Often this type of clause is found as the object of the preposition with. As what you can see of the examples in the screen, the preposition with there has been used to know that the bracketed material functions as nouns in subject and object positions. We may draw the three representations for this type of construction in a way similar to the first one for gerunds, except that no pro is required, since an overtly expressed subject is present to fill the same position. Other verbs taking this sort of complement include discover, feel, hate, have, hear, like, love, observe, prefer, recall, remember, see, and watch. For example, the authorities discovered the dog hiding behind the bushes. We could feel the weather turning cold. The tour leaders had us visiting museums day and night. Do you understand the 5 types of complements? In this part of this chapter, we have revised our set of phrase structure rules by adding a number of options to sentence, noun phrase, auxiliary, and verb phrase as follows. These revisions allow us to generate all the that clauses, infinitives, gerunds, and subject participle constructions that we have discussed in this chapter. So let's proceed to the threads of common meaning within complement types. The first one is the semantic similarities of verbs taking that complements and infinitive clauses. Up to now, we have said that certain verbs take a certain type of complement exclusively, while some verbs may occur with more than one. We have said that little about whether any sense can be made of the fact that claim takes a tense that complement, insist a subjunctive complement, believe either a that complement or an infinitive one, try either an infinitival or gerund complement, and make a bare infinitive. In fact, a loose correlation does seem to exist between the semantics of the main clause verb and the type of complement it takes. The correlation has been sketched by Gibbon. The next one is the verbs taking that complements. The main verbs that take ordinary tense that complements tend mostly to denote mental states or attitudes regarding the truth of the proposition in the complement clause. Thus to say that the example is to say something about the nature of the particular belief, its relative strength among other things. Gibbon places such verbs in the cognition utterance category and says that a clause in which such a verb occurs in 2 qualities. The first quality is the more loosely connected syntactically with the complement clause, and the second is not necessarily well integrated semantically with the complement clause. The first quality means, for instance, that it is easy to detach a that complement from its main clause, omit the complementizer, and be left with a perfectly well-formed sentence. While the second quality means that it is not at all necessary for the subject of the complement clause to be identical to any noun in the main clause. So in the verbs taking infinitive complements, we may contrast cognition utterance verbs with those which Gibbon calls more manipulative. Typically, these verbs take infinitival complements. Manipulative here means, in effect, that an agent named in the main clause is in some way related to or has some interest in the real or hypothetical occurrence of the event that is depicted in the complement clause. Thus, in the sentences, Mary wanted John to return sooner, or the teacher allowed the students to leave, Mary and the teacher have an interest in John's returning or the student's leaving. In accordance with Gibbon's criteria, such infinitives tend to be more integrated syntactically with their main clauses in that an infinitive cannot stand by itself as a sentence. It is more dependent syntactically on its main clause. The main clause and infinitive are also much more likely to share a noun phrase referent in common, as with the pro category, where the identity of the logical subject of the infinitive, for example, the Mary wanted pro to go, is controlled by a noun phrase in the main clause. In the case of bare stem infinitives, Mary made John stay, or John had a thief arrested. There is even more integration since there is no to present and since a stronger sort of control or involvement is depicted. Indeed, verbs like let, make, and have, together with their complements, are often called causative verbs, or constructions since one agent is causing another to act. Consider the following two sentences. She helped them to pick cherries. She helped them pick cherries. What do you think is the difference of the two? In the first case, the woman mentioned may have provided a ladder to the cherry pickers, while in the second case, we are more likely led to believe that she was actually picking the fruit together with the others. Her greater involvement is reflected in the use of a bare stem infinitive. It thus makes sense that a corpus study like that of Lind in 1983 would find bare stem infinitives appearing 6 times more frequently with animate subjects than inanimate when compared with to infinitive. The next one is the meaning of subjunctive verbs. The subjunctive is one of the 5 moods of English, one of the 5 sentence types that systematically exhibit the speaker or writer's attitude toward a proposition expressed in a sentence. Just as the interrogative involves the questioning of a proposition and the imperative marks a command. So the subjunctive exhibits the speaker or writer's orientation toward bringing a certain state of affairs into being. We have said that subjunctive clauses occur with a relatively restricted set of verbs, which include advise, ask, demand, insist, recommend, request, and urge, and argued that subjunctives have no tense forms. Yet the verbs that take subjunctive complement fit a special frame in which an agent, expressed or implied in the main clause, attempts to exert some control over the occurrence of the event in the embedded clause, usually through the action of a different agent that is the subject of the subjunctive clause. The verbs may express weak control, such as suggest and recommend, strong control suggesting the existence of one individual's authority over the other, such as insist and demand or require, or control of an in-between sort, such as ask and request. Thus, we get these 5 examples here. Verbs that simply express a desire for some event to occur that is without any evidence of influence or control at all tend not to take subjunctive complements. Thus, we get no subjunctive complement with hope. We cannot say that she hoped that her husband get a better job. The relevant semantic characteristic shows up also in the fact that the subjunctive is used in dependent clauses following certain main clause adjectives like important, imperative, and vital, but not following other adjectives such as understandable and main clauses. For example, it is important that she be given another chance. It was imperative that we act immediately. What is vital is that we not become overly anxious. And we cannot say that it is understandable that she be given another chance. Subjunctive clauses do not seem to fit Gibbon's strength of bond scale perfectly, in that while there seems to be strong manipulation, the syntax is almost as loose as with cognition utterance, verbs like believe, except that the verbs are tenseless. However, sentences in which subjunctives occur exhibit a common semantic theme. The meaning of verbs taking gerunds. Verbs that require gerunds such as enjoy, risk, deny, avoid, appreciate, defend, quit, and stop, among others, encode actions in the gerund complement that are vivid, real, ongoing, in the present, or completed in the past. They represent the success of the subject of the main verb, or the gerund in accomplishing some outcome which may be positive or negative. For example, Bob enjoys going to the movies is equivalent to Bob succeeds in going to movies. Another one is Sue avoided talking to Barry is equivalent to Sue succeeded in not talking to Barry. This is very different from those main verbs taking infinitives which encode future unfulfilled projections rather than past or present accomplishments in the complement. For example, Mary wanted to see the play is not equivalent to Mary saw the play. We discuss this distinction further in the next section. So let's proceed to infinitive to complements versus gerund ing complements. There is considerable overlap across the class of verbs that permit subject control infinitive complements and those that permit gerund ing complements. The overlap is illustrated in the italicized forms in the list below. In many cases of overlap, there is a distinct meaning difference implied, one which is worth focusing on here and pointing out to learners. In some cases, the difference is substantial. Consider the options with forget. He forgot to buy the books. He forgot buying the books. In the case of the first sentence where the infinitive is chosen, no books were bought, maybe because of forgetfulness. While the action described in the second sentence actually happened but was subsequently forgotten. Likewise with remember. Try to differentiate these two. She remembered to do her homework. She remembered doing her homework. In the first case, the meaning may be paraphrased by saying she did not forget that she had to do her homework, so she did it. While in the second, the intention is to say she did her homework and then later she remembered that she had done it. Some degree of correlation exists between the choice of infinitives with events that are hypothetical, future, and fulfilled, and the choice of gerunds with events that are real, vivid, fulfilled, a fact that was first pointed by Bollinger in 1968. So now, let us compare again the two sentences with the verb try. Peter tried to go to Oxford. Peter tried going to Oxford. In the first instance, native speakers tend to interpret the sentence to mean that Peter wanted to go to Oxford but did not, in fact, attend the school. In the second, the preferred interpretation is that Peter did go to Oxford but did not complete his studies. Compare the additional two sentences below. I tried to call you, but there was no phone anywhere. I tried calling you, but your line was busy. In the first instance, no calling took place, while in the second, at least one unsuccessful call was made. It is also worthwhile to look at how Bollinger's principle holds up with extremely frequent verb like. When someone expresses a desire to do something that he or she has not done before, it is common to use the modal construction would like and follow it with an infinitive. A gerund is much less acceptable. For example, I would like to go bungee jumping someday. While in the second, it is questionable, but in this sentence, I would like going bungee jumping someday. On the other hand, if someone has already done bungee jumping and wishes to express an affection for that activity, the gerund form is strongly preferred. I like going bungee jumping. While the Bollinger principle does not yield such clear distinctions for all of the overlapping pairs in the list above, it does provide teachers with a partial explanation for students who want to understand the meaning differences with verbs taking both types of complements. The aspectual options in infinitives and gerunds. We have argued that infinitives have no tense markings and therefore do not by themselves express past versus non-past time. However, infinitives do express aspectual relationships. These include the full range of aspectual categories, with the exception that the distinction between habitual or durative, just like in the first example, which is I want to drink espresso regularly, and punctual or one time, just like in the second sentence, I want to drink espresso tonight. If you want to express a specific ongoing activity, you should use a progressive form, just like in the examples below. I would prefer to be drinking espresso right now. And she expected to be doing homework during the time that her roommate was out. While in the sense of the completion of one event prior to the occurrence of another may be expressed with a perfect form. For example, I would prefer not to have drunk so much espresso this evening. In this case, the drinking occurs prior to the preferring. Another one is, the progressive and perfect form may be combined just as they may in ordinary main clauses. For example, I'm surprised to have been making so much progress these days. In this case, the ongoing condition, the making of much progress, is at least to some extent temporally prior to the surprise. For main verbs that express attitudinal states, the sense of future in past is conveyed with a main verb in the past tense plus a simple infinitive. By the way, when we say future in past, it is used to express the idea that in the past you thought something would happen in the future. So for example, for the main verbs that express attitudinal states, she wanted to go to Europe the following year. We didn't expect the weather to change soon. Where contrary to fact conditions exist, there are two options available. One can encode the counterfactuality either in the main verb through a perfect modal or in the infinitive through use of a perfect infinitive. For example, she would have liked to visit Munich in her trip. She would like to have visited Munich on her trip. And exacting attention to tense and aspect here may lead to two different interpretations. The first in which the liking expressed by the person in question existed prior to the moment of speaking and may not exist at the moment. And the second in which the liking does exist at the moment of speaking. However, the two forms seem interchangeable, at least in oral production. To add to the profusion of options, one frequently finds the same meaning conveyed in colloquial speech through the use of a doubly marked perfect, though this use is frowned on by prescriptive grammarians. She would have liked to have visited Munich on her trip. The meaning normally intended in such cases is not one in which one past event or state, which is the visiting, is set temporarily prior to another past event or state, which is the liking. Although again, that meaning may be conveyed when the forms are emphatically stressed. Gerund forms are likewise not marked for tense, but they too may express aspectual distinctions. In using a simple gerund, the distinction between perfective, just like in the first example, she remembered drinking espresso that night. The next one is the habitual, just like in the second example, she remembered drinking espresso during her 3 years in Italy. And lastly, the progressive, she remembered drinking espresso while the music was playing. While the gerund is in the perfect form, however, one may distinguish the progressive form, the perfect, through the presence or absence respectively of ing on the verb in the complement. For example, she remembers having been listening to Grieg concerto all evening. She remembers having listened to Grieg concerto at least once in her life. Once again, actual use may blur the distinction here, just as the distinction between I have lived here for 10 years and I have been living here for 10 years lies more in what is implied than what is necessarily expressed by the forms themselves. The next one is the ordinary infinitives versus purpose infinitives. In our discussion of infinitive types, we omitted mention of one additional type of infinitive. This type is distinct in not being regularly associated with any main clause verb and hence is not a true complement infinitive. It is called the purpose infinitive. For example, they covered the porch to shield out the sun. This drill bit is used to drill holes in metal. It is easy to distinguish purpose of infinitives from other infinitives by attempting to substitute in order to or so as to for to. You may also try to move the infinitive to first position in the sentence and see if an acceptable sentence results, just like in the examples. We used a wrench to fix the sink. Into to fix the sink, we used a wrench. Another one is we hope to take our vacation soon. Although this is not right, so to take our vacation soon, we hope. Purpose infinitives which are adverbial may be moved while ordinary infinitives may not. Easily one of the most confusing alternations for learners concerns the verb stop, which takes a gerund complement in one context but often appears with a purpose infinitive following. Note the difference in meaning below. Letter A, the man should stop drinking. His drinking should cease. While in letter B, the man should stop drinking. He should stop walking or driving or etc. to drink some water. We have said that gerund type complements are not well represented in the world's languages while infinitives are common. This fact undoubtedly contributes to the frequency of errors where the B sentence pattern above is substituted for the A pattern. Teachers should expect frequent errors of this type and perhaps address the issue directly during class time. The bare infinitive versus the subject participle complement. There is considerable overlap in the class of verbs that take bare infinitive complements and those that take subject participle complements. The overlap is illustrated in the italicized forms. It may be noticed that the most of the overlap concerns sensory perception verbs, right? One view advanced by Kirshner and Thompson in 1976 of the crucial difference between pairs like the examples in the screen reflects a difference between perfective and imperfective aspect, wherein the simple form marks an event seen as punctual, limited, and bounded or perfective. In contrast, the ing form marks an imperfective event, which is represented as durative, ongoing, or iterative, seen without focus on its beginning or end. This account explains why a main verb in the simple present tense may occur with an ing form but not a bare infinitive. For example, look, I see him leaving the building. You cannot say, look, I see him leave the building. Since the simple present is not used to mark discrete, punctual events, but instead states or ongoing or repeated actions, it makes sense that it would not take a bare infinitive, incompatible by nature with this viewpoint. The account also explains why a perception verb like observe can appear with a subject plus participle complement, but not a bare infinitive complement, even in the simple past tense. Part of the inherent meaning of observing involves the visual perception of something over an extended period of time without focus on the event as a completed whole. One observes an action in progress. We can observe the painting of a picture as it progresses, right? But we would not normally speak of observing a sudden, momentary event such as the switching on of a light. Thus, we are likely to hear sentences like, "We observed them eating dinner at Spago," but are unlikely to hear ones like, "We observed them sit down." Likewise, the capacity of independent action on the part of the subject was also noted by Kirshner and Thompson to account for pairs such as this. I saw the sunglasses lying or lie by the side of the road. Since sunglasses cannot act independently, the bare infinitive is not possible. We can also extend Kirshner and Thompson's proposal to a non-perception verb the causative verb have. For example, the boss had me turn off the light a moment ago. The boss had me turning off the light a moment ago. The boss had me turning off the light as part of my daily routine. Why do you think the second sentence is questionable? The second sentence, in order to be fully acceptable, would have to mean that the speaker's task, in itself a momentary, a punctual event, was repeated over an unspecified period of time, as in the more normal-sounding third sentence. So now, let's proceed to gerund complements versus subject-participle complements. For some speakers of English, there is a semantic contrast for verbs taking both the possessive gerund complement and the subject-participle construction. For example, I appreciate his taking care of the dog. I appreciate him taking care of the dog. Some speakers said that in the possessive gerund complement, a greater focus is on the entire event, while for the subject-participle construction, a greater focus will be on the agent noun phrase. And the last one is the causative constructions. We have already spoken of causative constructions as those that depict one agent successfully causing another agent to perform an action. Some verbs which enter into these constructions, such as cause, force, and get, fall syntactically into the object control category. Others, like make and have, take bare infinitive complements. So how do they differ in meaning? Here we will address have, get, and make. First is the have. The verb have suggests a routine hiring or selecting in which a relation of authority is implied, as between customer business person or creditor debtor. For example, we had Ray mow the lawn. I had the barber trim my hair. Fred had John give him $5. He had a stranger on the street give him directions. The questioned example above is inappropriate since it suggests a relation of authority which does not exist between two strangers in a chance meeting. The action performed must also relate to the specific area of authority. The second one is get. The verb get often tends to convey the sense that some difficulty was involved. Perhaps the subject of the main clause used persuasion or coercion on the subject of the embedded clause. For example, I got Ray to give me $5. And the third one is the make. The verb make suggests that the subject of the main clause has coercive power, though not necessarily authority in any conventional sense, over the subject of the infinitive. Example, he made a stranger on the street give him $5. Threat was involved. Have and get but not make may also take passive complements in which these meanings carry over well. I finally had the lawn mowed. I finally got the lawn mowed. And you cannot say that I finally made the lawn mowed. However, the get sentence is now ambiguous as to whether the lawn was mowed by the speaker or by someone else. According to Martin 1981, in the Discourse Analysis of Causatives, provides support for the distinctions made above. On the other hand, he also found native speakers favoring get for some fairly routine activities such as cashing a check, which may have involved some unexpected difficulties. For example, I finally got the check cashed. So now, we are already in the use of complements. The first one is the presence versus the absence of that. Bollinger suggests that one determining factor is the relative formality of discourse. The more formal the register, the more likely it is for that to be expressed. Another factor concerns specific verbs. The greater the relative frequency of the main verb in discourse, the more likely it is that the complementizer will be absent. For example, he said he wasn't interested. He conceded he wasn't interested. And the third one, he snarled he wasn't interested. A third factor is that the presence of intervening material between the verb and the complement tends to increase the likelihood that that will be present. Example: he said he wasn't interested. He said in a recent report that he wasn't interested. A fourth factor mentioned by Bollinger concerns whether the verb in the main clause operates on the verb in the complement clause in a causative sense. For example, the court decided that wiretaping must stop. I decided I was too old. In the first sentence, the court's power to stop the wiretaping makes the use of that more likely than in the second case, where no power over events or conditions is apparent. Underhill 1986 suggests several other interesting factors, including the relative degree of elaborate speaker endorsement of the truth value of the complement clause. The idea is that the greater the degree of speaker endorsement, the more likely that the complementizer will be absent. This may partially contribute to why that is so often absent where the main clause begins with I think, as in, I think I want to go home. Speakers are presumably most certain about their own mental states. According to recent corpus-based research by Biber 1998, the deletion for the complementizer that does indeed appear to be sensitive to register differences. For example, that is omitted most frequently in conversation and least frequently in academic prose, with fiction and news reportage falling between the two extremes. The second is the use of that complements. Biber 1998 also provides information on the frequency of that complements according to register. They are most frequent in conversation, next most frequent in fiction, then news reportage, and least frequent in academic writing. He also reports that the most common verbs controlling that complements in both conversation and news reports are think, say, know, see, believe, show, find, and feel. These are verbs of cognition, perception, and speech often related to the speaker's or writer's stance. Such corpus-based information can be of great use to language teachers, for it indicates the verbs to emphasize when introducing that complements. The teaching suggestions. For the form, students should make up their own verb plus complement sentences on a verb class by verb class basis, and after verifying the grammaticality and idiomaticity of these sentences, to reread or better recite their sentences orally at home, attending to their meaning. For Lesson 1, Attempt Type Infinitives. The teacher asks questions that elicit model sentences that can be put on the board. For example, what will you attempt to do this weekend? Where have you decided to go on your vacation next year? The teacher then leads a drill in which students generate sentences based on pairs of verbs provided by the teacher, such as refused or accept. Student: I refuse to accept your offer. Students can then work in small groups with pairings such as manage or finish, fail or do, offer or help, refuse or eat, and so on. Lesson 2. Want-type infinitives. The one class of verbs which may or may not have objects make a good focus for students interviewing other students. Most of these verbs give students ample opportunity to express their feelings on topics which concern them directly. The teacher may begin with, "What do you intend to study?" Then student, "I intend to study engineering." Another one is, "What does your family intend for you to study?" Student, "My family intends for me to study engineering too." Student to student, questioning follows with additional pairs, prefer or eat, hope or spend, the coming vacation, and so on, adding direct object forms where reasonable as above. Lesson 3. Verbs taking only gerund objects. The lesson continues to follow essentially the same pattern as the Lesson 2 and Lesson 1. Lesson 4. Verbs taking both gerunds and infinitives. At this stage, the teacher may find it useful to present Bollinger's principles distinguishing gerunds from infinitives, supplying verbs where the distinction is most clearly exhibited. For example, what do you remember doing yesterday? What did you remember to do yesterday? With each student answer, the teacher should make sure to confirm that the student intended to convey that he or she actually did or did not do the activity mentioned. The lesson then continues to follow the same pattern as above, but with student questionnaires skewed to elicit alternating pairs, such as forget plus gerund, forget plus infinitive, would like plus infinitive, like plus gerund or infinitive, and so on. Lesson 5. Encourage integration and transfer of rules learned in the preceding lessons. At this point, teachers may mix different types of verb plus complement pairs and either continue an activity like the above or have students write compositions or carry out role plays in which various verb and verb pairs suggested by the teacher are used. For the meaning. For verbs that take both infinitives and gerunds but with a difference in meaning, Bill Gaskill has suggested that explicit time sequences be used to teach the difference between infinitives and gerunds with main verbs such as remember and forget. The teacher introduces these verbs along with a number of situations that can appropriately serve as complements. For example, call my parents, tell you the news, lock the door, and smoke cigars. Then the notion of time sequence is introduced and an example provided to show that if the action in the main verb precedes the action in the complement, the infinitive is used, just like in the examples that you can see in the screen. Another one is the teacher must also show the reverse. That is, if the action in the main clause follows the action in the complement, the gerund is used, that again you can see in the screen. Within this, students can then generalize this activity to the verb forget. Another one for the meaning is that the distinction in use between verbs that alternate between taking bare infinitives and subject participle complements such as see, hear, watch, feel, and have can be modeled to some extent in the classroom by the teacher or by other students. Someone can close the door slowly and incompletely while asking, "What do you see?" That answer, "I see you closing the door." Someone can then close the door quickly and completely and ask, "What did you see?" Answer, "I saw you close the door." Teachers can use their imaginations in coming up with ideas for other verbs. This sort of activity can incidentally be done in conjunction with a review contrasting the simple present or present progressive and simple past or past progressive in the main clauses. The next one is the meaning or use. A good role-play situation for practicing the causative have is to role-play a beauty parlor and barbershop scene. A role play for 3 will include 2 customer and a beautician or barber. Beautician or barber will ask one customer, "What do you want to have done today?" The customer can then answer in a variety of ways using have. "I want to have my hair permed," "I want to have my sideburns cut," and so on. This customer can then ask the other customer what he or she wants to have done, and so on. It has even been suggested by Jill Rosenheim and Sue Wengarten that students actually visit a beauty salon or barbershop as a type of field experience and make an inventory of services available at the business. The next one is the form. Frodesen and Eyring 1997 suggest that students role-play the solving of a problem to practice the use of subjunctive that clauses. 2 or more students take opposite sides of an issue. For example, a young man would like to attend an all-female college. The president of the college wants to maintain the 100-year tradition of an all-female campus. Students then use the following frames to make their arguments. I propose that, I suggest that, and we recommend that. And lastly, for the use, find a news article containing many examples of that complements with several clauses having the that complementizer present and several others having it absent. Ask your student to work in groups and underline all the that complements and circle all the that complementizers. Ask them to come up with generalizations about why that appears before some of the complement clauses but not others. If they have difficulties, give them Bollinger's 1972 observations and see if they can apply this to the text they are analyzing. So that's all for today. I really hope that you understand about complementations. If you have any questions regarding my report, don't hesitate to beep me and I will do my best to answer it. Thank you and God bless and have a good day.